difficulty. This is our first foray into a webinar, and staff is doing an amazing job, but you know, technical issues, we're just kind of learning our way. So I see that Paul is with us this morning or this afternoon, and I'd like to kick us off. And thank you all for being a part of this. It's really nice to see your faces, and we are so pleased that we're able to have Paul talk to us about the effect of Corona-19 on our economy. Many of you know Paul. He is an associate dean at the Seidman College of Business. He began his position in 2015. We are so glad that he's a part of this community. I'm not going to read your whole resume, Paul, so rest assured, we'll just kind of leave it at that. You are going to be muted during the presentation, and as we go along, if you have questions that pop into your mind, we have a chat feature that we would like you to use, and at the end, Elizabeth will capture those and ask questions at the end. We also will be posting this on our website. We're capturing the webinar, so you will be able to look at it again or share it with other folks. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Paul Isely, and hopefully technology is good to go. So welcome, Paul.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I'm going to move to sharing my screen so you can all see the PowerPoints, and we will we'll try and move through those PowerPoints in 15 to 20 minutes so that you have some time to ask some good questions. So let's make sure I get there. Where'd it go? There it is. And I need to go to animate, let's see. Slideshow from beginning. All right, so what we're starting to do is we're starting to get some pretty good data on what the depth of this is going to be and some different trajectories as to what it looks like over the course of the next few months, with some caveats because we still don't fully understand the virus. All right. So I just want to make sure you sort of understand the background to this, because some of our data is going to be from the beginning of April, the end of March. So as you start to look at some of that data, you need to understand it in the context of when things happened across the United States. So the vast majority of the states instituted some level of restrictions around mid-March, but it was really that stay-at-home orders that really started that week of the 23rd across the United States that really started to change the economic impact. So for March, we were really only looking at 1 to 2 weeks of direct effect. And prior to that, a week or two of maybe some uncertainty that people were starting to have. It's hard to remember that far back and remember that we really probably weren't that worried at the beginning of March. Most common end date for stay-at-home orders right now is still April 30th, but we don't believe those. And we believe that those will get shoved back across the United States, and that it's going to be uneven, that some states are choosing to ditch those quickly and some are choosing to already extend those out into July. So we're already seeing that across the United States. What we do know is that the places that have been through this have chosen to come out of it gradually. So they choose a few industries and they start bringing people back to work in phases. So as we look at that, this is March retail sales. So I want you to see that clothing resale sales in March, and remember we were only locked down for 1 week and we were partially locked down for 2 weeks. We're down 50%. From February and down actually 50% from a year earlier. More importantly, outside of that retail sector is to see furniture and restaurants and bars and motor vehicles were all down 25%. Those are all what's really driving the economy in West Michigan. It's what drives the economy in Northwest Ottawa, because those are the things that really start to power things along. That little piece on the far right-hand side are grocery stores. So grocery stores are doing a little better right now, maybe. So that's sort of that spread. You can sort of see how that's affected sales across the United States. So I want you to see this for automotive because Northwest Ottawa is really exposed to automotive. So those first two bars you see there are the annualized light vehicle sales that happened in 1982 and 2009. So those of you with gray hair like me know that those are the last two recessions that were really bad. All right. February, you can see the February sales. So we were cruising along for a year, somewhere between 16.5 and 17 million units. In March, we dropped down below 12 million units. And the projections that we're looking at right now for April are just a little north of 8 million units. If these projections come true, this will be the worst month based on annualized sales since they started this series in 1976. So there's never been a month that's shown that level of decrease before. All right. So this is the unemployment claims and WARN notices. So unemployment claims, I'm not showing the continuing claims here, I'm showing the initial claims. And you can see those initial claims really peaked on the 4th of April, and they've been trending down since that time. So that feels good. It shows that that initial surge of all of those restaurant and hospitality workers, retail workers, and the beginnings of some of the manufacturing workers started to trickle into the unemployment system. All right. That drop down seems dramatic. What I want you to see is that light red line that occurs between 50,000 and 100,000 down there. That was the worst week of initial claims during the 2008-2009 recession. So that was the worst week in our previous recession. So we're not quite down to our worst week in the last time we did this yet. Based on today's numbers, we're now sitting at around 22% unemployment here in Michigan. So that is also a number that we haven't seen in my lifetime. We haven't seen this in most people's lifetimes. If it had been correctly measured in the 1930s, we would have seen it then. So this is a tremendously huge number that we're seeing right now. I also want you to see the WARN notices, which are notices that certain businesses have to give the federal government when they're going to have layoffs or a shutdown. And I want you to see that right now we've had more WARN notices in the last 2 weeks of March than we had in all of 2019, or that we had in the 6 weeks following Lehman's failing in 2008. So right now we're really looking at some pretty dismal numbers when we look at the overall effect in the economy. To give you an idea of the most affected sectors and what their relative size is in Michigan, these are our most affected sectors as we look at those who have been claiming unemployment benefits. And realize that we're seeing more and more healthcare workers now claiming unemployment benefits, and fewer people from retail and food service and manufacturing. Those are actually dropping now. So that's happening. And you can see across that entire group, that's about 2 million people, about half of the employment here in Michigan. So these are the most affected industries, and many of these industries will see more than a 50% haircut this month. April will be a month for the history books, and I think it will actually be the worst month. So if you feel a bit in despair right now, understand that although we probably won't have a really fast recovery, that the recovery probably is going to start really soon. All right. So where's the good news? At least in the short run, some of the good news is that the average worker is able, in those three most affected industries, are actually going to end up with weekly unemployment benefits that are greater than their weekly paychecks. So what we're seeing is that although there are people who will not have access to this, and they didn't have access, and many people didn't have access the first few weeks in April, as we start getting into May, we have 900,000 people who are going to be getting unemployment benefits that are on the order of $800 a week. All right. So that's going to be enough to pay a lot of bills. It's going to be enough to buy food. It's going to be enough to keep the economy running for a little while. There's also the stimulus checks that are hitting. People who were set up electronically have already started to see those. People who aren't set up electronically won't see those till summer probably. All right. To help you understand, the slowdown that we're expecting through June is going to take $2.5 to $3 trillion out of the U.S. economy. So as we look at the end of March through the end of June, there's going to be a $2.5 to $3 trillion hole. The U.S. government is borrowing from the future in order to try and fill part of that hole. And they're putting $2 trillion in. They're adding more right now as we speak. All right. And the last little piece is West Michigan is doing a little bit better as we look at how renters paid rent. As we went into April, Michigan was 10 points higher and West Michigan was 10 points higher in rent paid than the U.S. as a whole. So the U.S. as a whole was only about 60% of renters paid their rent. We were over 70%, and of those that didn't, half paid part. So as we were going into this, people in West Michigan were in better shape than what we were seeing along the coasts. All right. So what about going forward? Because you probably already knew that it was already pretty ugly. So as we go forward here, we're really looking at a best case and a worst case to try and bookend things a little bit, because one of the things that we don't know is how fast this virus will let us get back to business. All right. So our best case scenario is looking at April being really bad, like it is, and we know what April's going to look like, and that we're able to start doing some measured returns to our economy as we move into May. Those things will include things like outdoor construction. It'll include things like lawn care. It'll include things like some types of manufacturing where we can have good controls in the plant and social distancing. So as we look at that, really I would expect in the first part of March, we're looking at maybe 100,000 people going back to work out of the little bit around 1 million that we need to bring back to work. And that if that starts to go well, that will continue to improve as we continue to the end of the month. Understand, if we start to do this too fast and we have to go back, we won't know that for 2 weeks, which is one of the reasons why they end up being cautious about this. Because one of the worst things you want to do is to have to do what we did in April again, because we won't be able to claw out of that very easily. All right. The worst case scenario is the virus doesn't get enough under control and starts coming back in waves. And so we're having to shut down and do targeted shutdowns and do that sort of thing. So our best case scenario right now, when we looked at it from the end of the year, feels an awful lot about like the last recession. All right. So we're looking at something along that lines. If by some chance that we have this recurring virus that occurs over and over again, right now the model is showing that it being double that size. So we're really hoping for that best case scenario. To help you understand the difference on the state budget, right now we look at the drop in revenues and the added costs, putting a $6 billion hole in the state government if we're in the best case scenario. That's a 20% drop in that's a decrease of 20% on taxes collected, or a decrease of 10% on the entire budget. And then we're looking at a worst case scenario, which is closer to $10 billion. So we're looking at a 15 to 20% hole in that budget. All right. So what tells us and what do we need to be looking for as to whether we're going to be near the good side of that? And I use the word good not too well, I guess, but the better side of that, or if we're going to be on the worst side of that. And the two things we need to be thinking about are consumer confidence and the virus. All right. So if you look at the Michigan Consumer Confidence Index, we can see that drastic drop as we went from February to April, where we went from where we had been trending between 90 and 100 for years, and we dropped down to 70 in April. That's a very bad number. But when they dove down into the numbers, they found something very interesting, that people really weren't worried about their finances. In fact, only about 20 to 25% of the respondents listed finances as something they were worried about. Almost everybody was worried about getting sick. So this drop in confidence is about worrying about getting sick and having to go through what we've seen people in hospitals go through. All right. So the bad news, but good news about that is that right now, if we can get that virus under control close enough that people's fear about the virus starts to go away, we're still primed for this to come back pretty quickly. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like that's going to be the case. So if we look at COVID patients on ventilators, and I know the press likes to use a number of new cases, number of new positives. The problem with number of new positives is we've been drastically increasing the amount of testing over the last week. So you've probably heard Kent County has seen a bunch more people test positive. Well, the percent negative has stayed pretty constant. And what we're also seeing is the number of people who are needing drastic care has been dropping across the state. A lot of that has to do with the other side of the state right now because Detroit is improving pretty quickly. Now, I'm not a medical person, and I'm not claiming that we're reaching the end of this, but I am claiming that the trends for really bad cases have been improving, showing that the social distancing has started to knock that down. What the public health people are going to want to have it is low enough that we can test people when we think they have it, and then test every run around them if they have it. And that's going to require us testing at about double to 3 times the rate we're seeing right now in Michigan. So we're going to need more testing if we want to come back a little bit faster. So what are my takeaways? We're going to have a lot of starter fluid being dumped in the economy in May between the stimulus checks, between some of the things that we're seeing with the SBA loan issues, between the unemployment benefits. All of those things start coming in as we hit May. And that's going to allow people, a lot of people, more breathing room than they had in April. And it's going to facilitate us restarting the economy if the economy and the virus are ready for us to do so. We expect industries that can allow good social distancing or good procedures around social distancing to be the ones that come back first. Right now, as we talk to the medical folks, as I model this, I'm not projecting group events all the way through summer. So we're not looking for group events really happening anytime in the near future. So that was my quick 20 minutes of where the economy is at and the things that we're looking at to go forward. Are there questions?
Yeah, this is Elizabeth from the Chamber. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, good. We did have one question come in. And reminder, everybody, if you do want a question, just put it in the chat box. I'll be tracking that. And the first question is, since summer is just around the corner, what's your projections regarding tourism in West Michigan?
Yeah, what's my projections for tourism in West Michigan? Well, again, that's going to depend on whether we have that best case or that worst case scenario. If we follow that best case scenario where we see the virus slowly continue to stay under control, that we're required to have some social distancing, but we're allowed to go and buy things and those sorts of things. What we're really looking at is the possibility for some pretty good tourism numbers for the second half of summer. And the reason we're seeing that is no one's going to want to get on an airplane. No one's going to want to travel across lots of states where they have less certainty about what's happening. So it's going to be more likely that people from Chicago are going to drive up the lake. It's going to be more chance that people in Michigan are going to choose a vacation that if they can cobble one together that includes something outdoor and something in Michigan. So I think that there's some possibility that we can piece something together for the second half of summer. The first half of summer is going to be problematic because there's going to be enough social distancing controls in unless something drastically changes to really facilitate going out to eat in the ways that we're used to, in shopping in the ways that we're used to. So if we start to see resurgence of the virus where we're having to go through successive lockdowns, then your guess is as good as mine. It would be a disaster for tourism. So I think that if things start to get under control, Michigan's going to be able to take advantage of the fact that no one's going to want to get on an airplane and they're going to want to stay in West Michigan.
Okay, I have a couple more questions that have popped up. One is that Michigan is certainly not the first state, or the U.S. is not the first country to deal with this. Have you modeled other countries and how they've gotten back to business?
Yep. In fact, the only way we can do any modeling right now is to look at how other countries are going through this. We ignore China because China's data was so bad that it's not as useful. It is very useful in understanding how to set up your business to be able to run in those conditions, but it's not very good at trying to track the economy. So we're looking at places like China, at Taiwan. We're even looking at the Northern European countries like Germany and Denmark, where we're starting to see them take steps through restarting their economy, and whose virus densities were much closer to what we saw in most of the United States. New York City and Detroit looked an awful lot like Italy and Spain, but the rest of the United States really didn't. And so how you model the United States is really dependent on where you are in the United States and which countries you have that are a few weeks ahead of us that you can match off of. So most of Europe is about 3 weeks ahead of us. They've started to reopen just a little bit. Many of those countries have better testing than we do right now. But we have another week and a half to try and ramp that up. And let's see what we can do before May to ramp that testing up so that we can facilitate how fast we can reopen.
Okay, thank you. Another question that came up, any projections on how our educational institutions are going to function this fall?
I have to be careful about that because I work for an educational institution. So I'm going to talk about it in a higher level thought process. What we do know is that as institutions, whether they be K through 12, whether they be higher ed, are looking at this, they're looking at fall likely still having some social distancing requirements. They're looking at students being scared about being in classrooms. We're looking at the possibility that there'll be continuing orders of some kind or another. So as you take those all into consideration across the United States, we're seeing schools look at how do you teach face-to-face but have a lower density of individuals in classrooms. And we're looking at, and you're seeing schools across the United States look at how could they use blended or online education to augment some of that to create a more blended experience for the students. Now we're hoping we don't have to use that sort of direction, but certainly that's a direction that's being prepared for right now. And certainly there's an expectation that some students, and we're already hearing as national surveys come out, that some students are thinking this might be a good year for a gap year. Now for me, I'd want my gap year such that I could go backpacking in Germany and not stay at home. But that's the level of fear that's there right now. One thing we know from psychologists is fear is a very powerful emotion. And all of you have probably noticed that no matter what you do during the day, you're probably more tired at night than you are otherwise. People can't sustain that level of fear forever. They have to start looking forward and start looking for ways to move forward and move on. And the question is, how fast does that happen?
Okay, one final quick question. Do you think that we have seen the peak in unemployment?
I think that April will be the peak in unemployment.
Okay.
I think that it won't show up until the May number. The May number will actually have a higher unemployment number. And we're going to see that those first-time claims bounce around a little bit. But really, it was that initial surge. We're now seeing a second round of layoffs starting to happen as people start to understand what's happened to their orders. They're starting to understand that maybe the SBA isn't going to completely save them if they don't have something that's going to work. And so we're seeing that second round, but that second round looks a lot more like a normal recession than that hard stop that we had at the beginning of April. So as a result, we're really thinking that the April or the very beginning of May likely is going to be the peak.
Okay, we have one final question, if we can get it in before we close this out. What can you say about hiring and manufacturing as we go forward?
What can I say about hiring and manufacturing? Well, I can say that many of the people on this call probably know more than I do. But I can say that there's going to be, depending on what industry you're in, there's a lot of different dynamics happening right now. So that hard stop on purchasing of automobiles is really going to affect the automotive firms. That cut in corporate profits that we're going to see in the first and second quarters of this year that will continue as we go through the year will really put a damper on furniture purchases. And that's really going to take a bite out of what people need to hire going forward. So I think what we're seeing right now are firms trying to protect the critical workers that they have. They're trying to find ways to augment the amount of automation that they have so that they can increase the amount of social distancing they have in their plants. We see them activating automation that they had planned but weren't quite ready to bring prime time. So we see that happening. And we see, because everybody's had to learn how to do transactions online, we see transactional workers. And as I talked to you as we talked to you a little while ago in February, when times were slowing down but a lot better, that transactional workers were going to have a hard time coming out of this next recession, and this has really accelerated that. So that's what we're seeing right now, but it's early days, and it's going to depend on how fast we can restart those parts of our economy, and then whether there's somebody there to buy the goods when they start making them.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Isely. Really appreciate your time this afternoon, sharing all this information with us. It's helpful to hear it so we can start making decisions. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today. I hope you were able to take some valuable information away. Yeah, have a great afternoon, everybody.